Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Mark Azulay, and I'm here with a very special episode with Philip Botha. He is a coach that works on culture development, healthy workplaces. He's also a senior people scientist where he helps to figure out trends to help people, I guess, basically just perform better at their job. And he's a long-term client of Men's Therapy Online. So I'm excited to be able to work with Philip in this capacity, kind of get to know you in another, avenue. And I'm sure this conversation will blend both personal and professional. So Philip, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mark. Good to be here. Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, so we always start the first segment is kind of a bio of who you are, how you got here, and how you got into this work. So you can let the people know like
Mm.
why people focused work, why organizational development.
It's a great question, and I'm hesitant to call myself an expert on anything, but I think I have a journey and a story to share. I've always been curious about people, like why they do what they do. I back in the day, I thought about studying psychology, like you're doing right now, but I only knew clinical psychology, and I actually thought, well, I actually don't want to sit and listen to people's problems all day, right? So I thought, like, what's my second interest? And I got into software engineering, and that took me down a path that actually inevitably led me back to people. Because my passion has always been just helping individuals grow, help them set up to do their best work, and getting teams to work together really well. So that's kind of the roundabout story where today I went from software engineering to HR role for like 5 years, and now kind of out on my own doing consulting work and really getting out of bed in the mornings and like, yes, I get to do what I'm passionate about.
Yeah, I think it's so critical, right? Because most people have jobs, right? And most people spend a ton of
Mhm.
time at their job, and a lot of jobs are
Mhm.
toxic. So I'm curious,
Mhm.
as you were coming
Mhm.
up, like what are some toxic patterns that you saw in the workplaces where you were an engineer?
Yeah. Honestly, like Mark, I actually started noticing these patterns as a kid, as
Yeah.
like my mom's also in the software engineering side and technology side. And she would come home just overworked, unhappy, stressed. And I was always aware of like, that doesn't look fun. I don't want that for myself. And then I started having that lived experience in the software space. And the pattern I notice is really how people show up at home is how they show up at work, right? Is it insecurities? Is how they have difficult conversations? What triggers them? How to handle the triggers? Are they able to have vulnerable conversations? Is there the organizational space, and safety to have that conversation? And honestly, from the sports field to engineering teams, companies, any team really, like those patterns are the same. And you're not going to be effective and successful or winning team if you don't really learn how to work together. As cliche as that is what it comes down to.
Yeah. And what were some of the issues that you had as you were entering the workplace? Because I agree, right? There is like that
Mm,
combination of personal and professional. It's like, of course, we're the same person that we
right,
are in
right.
our personal life and our professional life. So, what are some challenges that you
Mm,
had to overcome to be a more
mm.
effective leader?
Wow. I think a key to that was understanding what win-win looks like. I we were just talking about this earlier, right? Like I recommend books, like same 5 or 6 books to people every week. And the book that really actually again, my mom played a big role in my life. Gave me this book. It's called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of the habits is seek to understand, but also win-win. Find a win-win.
Yeah.
Those two principles, very simply, that's was a game changer for me. Like really using that kind of people mindset and trying to put myself in the other person's shoes. Like what's important to them? What might a reasonable person want from this situation? Like if I coming from a place of judgment, this person's just being difficult or they don't want to work with me or just being selfish. Like I'm not really gonna be able to empathize with them. So I think empathy in the workplace is a biggie for a healthy organization. And it starts one-on-one, right? It's like actually start with yourself and then one-on-one relationships, like and trying to put your own defenses down and then putting yourself in the shoes of the other person, like and asking them, like, be curious, what's going on for you? What is important in this conflict we're having? What are you trying to get out of it? And then that's where the light bulb moments, the aha moments. And then I start mastering that from an individual perspective. I start mastering that as a leader, how to bring that out of my team. And then later start teaching team members 360, like peer to peer, how do you have these, crucial conversations and absolute game changer.
Yeah, I think conflict is so critical. And it's such
Mm,
a thing that so many men struggle with, which is wild, right? Because I
mm,
think when you think
mm,
of like the man that needs therapy, right? It's often this like
Yeah.
bully person,
Yeah.
right? This guy who's like
Mm.
really combative and is
Yeah.
like bulldozing people and,
Yeah.
has like a violent past or whatever, right? But like what I see
Mm.
often is I think what you're touching into is like this nice guy archetype, which I have been,
Mm.
right? Of like
Mm.
very conflict avoidant,
Yeah.
like often really struggles with conflict or struggles even knowing what their needs are, and it kind of comes out sideways, right? As like, kind of clumsy. Oh, it's like, I just want you to go away, right? Versus
Yeah.
like maybe the need is like, oh, I just need to be heard and have more respect in our
E-
conversations or something, you know?
Exactly. I think that especially from a guy's perspective, right, is that I think this cognitive dissonance we have because of what society tells us, like you don't bring emotions into the workplace.
Yeah.
Like you gotta shut that stuff up, right? And actually, that's where EQ comes in, emotional intelligence, right? Is be aware of what's going on for myself and exploring that first. And that's kind of a big thing I do in my coaching work as well. I start with awareness. Well, actually start with transformation. What are you trying to change? Where do you want to go? And then start with you, where you at versus always pointing to the other person. So emotions is okay. There's a saying we have in the kind of culture building space is that emotions aren't noise; they're data. Like it doesn't mean you have to be reactive, but you need to be aware of what's going on for you so that you can navigate that constructively. So I think, and that's the big, was like a light bulb moment for me. It's like, it's not this black and white. You leave emotions at home. It's like, was that TV show on Apple called Severance, right? You don't sever your rest of yourself and coming to work Philip, right? Philip and work Philip is actually the same person. And that's so freeing a lot of way. And if you can create an environment, culture where that is okay, it doesn't mean everyone's running around emotionally just reacting. It's like we make space for that. Like talk to your team, your peer in your team, or someone who reports to you, like, hey, what's going on for you? Let's just put work aside, say, what's going on? Where are you at? And just that process like opens people up and brings the defenses down, and they start feeling psychologically safe. It's a little key word we throw around a lot. It just means like you feel okay with being yourself and being okay in the workplace. And from there, you can do a lot. You can do a lot.
Yeah. And I think it builds loyalty to a workplace, right? Of that like sees them
Mm,
as a whole person versus that
yeah.
what their role is. And I think what you're
Mm,
talking about, I want to dig into it more, this paradigm shift around emotions,
mm, mm,
versus
mm.
emotions being an obstacle versus, like you said, being data. So I'm curious if you were to dig into that idea, what type of information can you get from the emotional state of an organization?
Mm.
What kind of, actionables could come from those data?
I mean, so much, and there's various ways to capture that data. A lot of companies do. It's called engagement surveys, and it's very much a sentiment pulse, like how people feeling in general about topics. Even that's at an aggregate level, that's really effective. And you can understand how people see leadership, development opportunities, like their growth opportunities at company, which connects to retention. Do they feel they're equipped to do their work? Right? Those are all kind of feelings and senses. You're not asking about specific tools, you just, it's a general sentiment. And you can kind of track it per team, per department overall, and realize, okay, I need to prioritize this. We need to spend time because you can spend time on so many things in a company that kind of survey at an organizational level helps you zoom into where should I spend my efforts. And I mean, the business benefits, which we should talk about, which is kind of like an obvious outcome, but it's like, yeah, you get to keep your people longer. They don't, you minimize retention. That's a big savings. They're more engaged. They give discretionary effort, like they go above and beyond just enough to not to get fired. That kind of mindset. Um, and you can also take a layer deeper. That's kind of the win-win, and that's where kind of leadership coaching comes in. It's like, how do you have those conversations at one-on-one level? And you can really customize for every person on your team what is going on for them. Like, do they need some? Are they going through a tough period at home, and their work is suffering? And that's kind of like a downward spiral in a lot of ways. Unless what? Guess what? Team can rally, leadership can support, but unless you have that conversation, you won't know. So again, that's kind of a long-term investment in the relationship that retains people. They do better work. They're more committed. Kind of win-win all around.
As you're talking, I'm hearing it's like instilling curiosity, really, right? Just like actually being
Mm,
interested in the people around you.
mm, mhm.
How do you instill that? How do you help people really see their work as more than just a paycheck?
That's a toughie. I think this is my perspective, and there are different views on this. It's like intrinsic motivation is hard. It's not really possible to instill. it's possible to draw out. So draw out. There's this another book that I recommend to managers all the time. It's called First Break All the Rules. It's written by Gallup organization, Marcus Buckingham, and so on. And one of the key takeaways from that book don't is to basically lead people, manage people based on their strengths, their passions, and not focus so much on the weaknesses. Because just bringing out their strengths is hard enough, but the benefits exponential. So if you create that environment where, I'm sorry, I actually lost my train of thought here a little bit, Mark. What was the initial question?
Oh, how to instill curiosity in the workplace and having people actually be
Yep.
interested and ultimately care about each other.
Like it really, thanks for that. It really starts with the interview process, being curious there.
Yeah.
Like understanding what you're looking for, what's your culture, how are we going to lead in our teams, and then being curious from that process and getting people that not just have the skills, but can also align with and will work well in your company, your team. And then from there, you carry that same kind of mindset over to a leadership perspective, and being curious about what drives them, right? And just bringing it out. Because if people aren't motivated in the first place, their passions aren't being triggered, you're not going to really be able to instill that.
Right. And I think people will leave because they feel like they're not important, or they feel like they're replaceable, which nobody wants to feel that way.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. You talk about conflict, right? And I think we're kind of dancing around this topic of what a good conflict looks like. How would you
Mm-hmm.
describe that to our listeners of how do you have a conflict in a workplace that doesn't result in them losing their job?
It is definitely challenging. It's multi-layered. Actually, I had a coaching session earlier this morning where very mature, experienced individual needing to have a conversation with a manager, and it's just so hard.
Yeah.
It's so hard because they know what to say. It's just getting into it. Um, I think what happens is that sorry, I'm losing my so many thoughts here. Oh, that's right. Kind versus nice versus kind, right? Ties a little bit into Mr. Nice Guy again. What's the difference between nice and kind? Nice is kind of you dancing around the topic, right? It's like what actually needs to be said. Where kindness is actually you're direct, but comes from positive intent and is done in a gentle way. There's another book, Radical Candor, also thrown a lot by Kim Scott, where people think, well, being direct is just being saying whatever comes to mind right away, direct. And you're not concerned about when you say it, how you say it, and what you say, and wrapping that in a cocoon of trust and psychological safety. So that you broaching that, getting to a place of healthy conflict, you need to understand where people are coming from, know that they have your best intent, your best at heart, and then be able to give feedback. Like, I'm saying this, might not be useful to hear, but I want the best for it. This is why I'm saying it. I'm not here to break you down and critique you. I want you to use this as evidence data to action and then get better.
Yeah, so I'm curious. You mentioned before about the power structure, right? Like when you're coaching
Mm-hmm.
clients, was trying to go up the power
Mm-hmm.
structure. What
Mm-hmm.
barriers do you see there? Because I just, I now I'm
Mm-hmm.
self-employed, so I don't really have to deal with this particular part of business.
Yeah.
But
Mm-hmm.
when I was working in companies, that was the hardest part, right? Was like
Yeah.
going up the chain and bringing
Mm-hmm.
feedback to somebody,
Yeah.
in a way that is tactful and effective.
Mm-hmm. That is hard because of the kind of structured power
Right.
dynamics, and there's multiple layers to that as well. Not just hierarchical level, but it's also social, societal, historic. Like are we the same in different skin color, gender, affiliations, what university you went to? So there's a lot of layers of complexity. Um, there is a lot individuals can do. I think a lot of times people like trying to have this difficult conversation with a leader feel like I don't have power. But a lot of times the assumption is like they're in it for themselves and they're here to, they don't have my best at heart. And that isn't always true. They haven't necessarily tested it. It's an assumption. And I think assumptions are very dangerous. And that's where, if you're tactful about it, you can broach conversation by testing the assumptions and just seeking to understand. Kind of comes back to that principle again. And then you kind of know where you stand because sometimes, unfortunately, the reality is like sometimes you're in a toxic environment. So it depends on context. But at the same time, it's two-way. So there's a lot the leader needs to do, the organization needs to do to create that psychological safety. And I mean, another cliche saying is everything rises and falls in leadership. So, but it's always a two-way street. And I try to like coach people not to, whether they're a manager or individual contributor, to not fall into that kind of victim mode either. Like there's actually a lot you can do and explore.
Yeah, can you describe what that means? Everything rises and falls in leadership. Like, what does that mean?
It's like everything has consequences, right?
Yeah.
It's like there's a ripple effect to what you do, the decisions you make, how quickly you move, how you interact with people, and I think sometimes, often, what I've observed is that uh, leaders are so outcomes focused that they just think about getting stuff done. When they miss out that, well, there's actually a journey here. You need to bring people along. They need to grow with you. They need to understand why. They need to feel safe. And you actually need to like this idea of being culture first. So actually focus on the people, set up people's success, and they'll drive the business results. It's very easy to say, but it's such a challenging mindset for companies. So I do a lot of kind of coaching, strategic coaching and planning around like, so how do you actually do this? How do you operationalize this way of thinking to really use your team, your workforce as an engine, to drive those outcomes?
Yeah, as you're talking, I think we'll talk more about this on the other side of the break. The word fear just keeps coming up. Like it just sounds like in some of these
Mm,
organizations, no matter how successful they are, or these people, no matter how successful they are, there's a sense of fear and scarcity that I think leads
mm,
to missing the people, right? Missing the actual
mm.
relationships and the people around them.
Yeah.
Like I imagine someone's very outcome focused because they don't want to lose their job, or they want to get to that next promotional level. There is like a
Mm.
lack of safety, like you said. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. I think the theme I'm observing is that also the talent market currently,
Yeah.
I think people feel it's very competitive. There's a bit of a scarcity mindset, even though it is actually a lot more opportunity than there was maybe even 3, 4, 6 years ago, right? So that does impact how folks, how comfortable they are. But often, even if the market is good, talent market, people tend to just kind of, well, I'm not going to deal with this issue. I'm just going to leave and go somewhere else. And they don't really grow, which I feel is a missed opportunity.
Yeah, I agree completely. So we're going to move into our first commercial break. When we come back, I want to hear more about the underlying emotions in a workplace, talking a little bit
Mhm.
about how to recognize and build strengths within teams, and a big
Mhm.
question of what is a healthy workplace. We can often
Mhm.
talk about what it's not, but I'm curious what it is as well. So if you're listening, hang on in there, and we'll see you on the other side of the break. Welcome back to the show. I'm here with Phil Botha, and we're talking about workplace culture, how to create psychological safety, and the role of coaching in all that and becoming a better leader. So, Philip, I want to start you with a question of
Mhm.
how does someone know they're in a toxic workplace? Because I think in
Mhm.
our culture, it can go either way, right? I think like there's some people who have maybe never had any other job and they think that their
Mhm.
workplace is horrible, right?
Yeah.
When in doubt, it might be one of the better places to work in town, right?
Yeah.
And vice versa, where somebody could really be in an abusive workplace and because they don't have a lot of
Mhm.
experience, they could just be like, oh, it's fine, right? This is what
Yeah.
every job is. So, you mentioned starting with awareness. So how can someone become aware that a workplace culture is unhealthy and not working for them?
Yeah. I mean, such a good question, and I'm going to give you the short answer would be a typical organizational psychologist answer, which is it depends. Like, and it's contextual and it's on a scale. I think let's get the obvious one out of the way, right? If and I actually like the words hostile and function, dysfunctional versus
Hmm.
functional, a little bit better than toxic because I feel that's a little bit binary and people seem to tend to throw it around a little bit. I mean, if environment's hostile, like you feel physically, sexually harassed, emotionally, like it becomes pretty clear.
Yeah.
That's when you kind of have a HR case, right? That's clear, black and white, and that could be company-wide, pervasive, or an instance. That is your experience as an individual. That is, I would say, hostile, and that's not okay. So that's more black and white, more clear for me. And we can obviously unpack that one. When it's a little bit more subversive in a way is when it's not obvious hostility, but you don't feel great. You don't feel engaged. You don't feel like you can speak up. You're self-censoring. You're working around people. That's when the word politics get thrown around a lot.
Hmm.
What does politics mean? And the way I kind of describe it is just when you're not able to say something directly or be direct because there's lack of trust, psychological safety, and you go around. You do workarounds, you avoid things a lot like personal home relationships. When you start stonewalling, avoiding that kind of stuff, and you see that in the workplace, it's probably not as functional as healthy. Again, I don't see it's a binary thing. Like most companies fall on that scale. No company, no organization is perfect. No relationship, no family is perfect. So it's understanding like where do I fall in that on that scale organization, and what is my role in it is the other thing. Because this is the kind of side irony is that I've often hear people leave companies and they tend to tell me how they showed up and how they operate and like really and they're saying this company is toxic, right? And I'm listening to their behavior and how they showed up in the company. I'm like, that's not really that seems consistent with the culture. Like it's so, with us, we also have to look at ourselves at the same time, have humility in that sense. And you can break the what's healthy and what's dysfunctional, not functional down a little bit. Things I look for is absence of trust. I'm a big fan of Patrick Lencioni, another really good book, Five Dysfunctions of a Team. It's been around for quite a while. It's a really easy framework. Uh, when there's fear of conflict, when we say conflict, it's like having direct conversations, not talking about hostility here, but really just uh, do I have safe to deconflict and have a disagreement? The lack of commitment when people don't really, yeah, that's a team decision. I don't really agree with that. I'm just going to go over here and do my own thing. That's dysfunctional as well. It's not hostile. It's just it's not it's not good teamwork, right? And then avoidance of accountability. Like that's such a biggie and so hard to keep other people accountable. You need a lot of safety and trust and all those things. People don't always follow through in what they do. Yeah, it's also dysfunction. Like lastly, is the bottom line for organizations is you don't get results, right? Or it's poor results, or it's mediocre. It's not what it could be, but we're kind of chugging along. We're doing the thing, but we're actually not where we could be.
Yeah, that's really clear. I think those examples are very helpful. And I imagine
Mm-hmm.
people, as you're talking, can think back either to their current job or to past
Mm-hmm.
jobs they've had. It's like, oh yeah,
Mm-hmm.
there wasn't that
Yeah,
trust there. Like there was a lot of politics. Everything seemed harder than it needed to be. And
yeah,
I think with big organizations, the politics thing is so interesting. Where it's like, oh, don't talk
mm-hmm.
to so and so about this thing, but you can talk to this other person about this other thing, and it's like all
Yeah,
about influence and control, and having factions and voting majorities and
yeah,
stuff like that. Like,
yeah.
how do you start to like untangle that knot in a larger corporate setting?
Hmm. It's a really tough question. I mean, it's if you I think if you're able to do that and do that quickly and easily, like you'll have a pretty massive recipe. I think what I do from a consulting perspective, and actually reminds me of a story that I can. quickly tell about how I got into HR or people side of things. I don't really like the term HR, but so in my last engineering gig, I spent my first 12 years of my career as a software engineer and then an engineering manager. And I spent 4 years and 10 months building a team from 2.5 engineers to 40. We had great engagement. We had 0% turnover for 27 months. That was our record. We competed against companies like Amazon and Google and and some other big employer brands, and we kept our folks. We actually poached people from their interview processes to come join our story. A really healthy culture. We took our little startup from two live customers, financial institutions, banks, to almost 30 worldwide for those folks in Colorado. First Bank of Colorado was our first client. So really some big stuff in a short period of time. It took me 5 years to build that team. Within 3 or 4 months, and I'm not exaggerating here, the culture was dismantled. So it came our subculture was different from the rest of the company, and that created conflict. We weren't able to resolve it, and there's a lot of pressure on our team to just change the way we work. My boss said, like, my values don't align. This is not how I want to operate. I'm out of here. I left, and within exactly 12 months, 1/3 of the engineers resigned to the number. We saw them resign. Company has never recovered. They're flatlined. I think they're trying to sell now. They're struggling. And it's like, wow, is that not a, case in point, great case study of the impact of culture? And it became because at the very top level, and that comes back to my other mantra of everything rise and falls of leadership. At an executive level, executives couldn't deconflict. They couldn't have a honest, direct conversation. So that's why if you think of, when I think about transformation, and that's a term thrown around a lot, it really starts at the top. I need to understand the individuals involved in there. We need to kind of do a values alignment here. If there's growth areas, that's great. There needs to kind of be humility and receptiveness, and openness. Otherwise, coaching won't work. Otherwise, any planning strategy won't work if they, pull up the brakes on anything. So it's a bit of it's change management. It's the word thrown out. It starts at the top, and then you can kind of start mapping a lot of layers. And this is where kind of a lot of consulting hours goes into, like, how do we get work done? What is our systems, operations? What's our leadership? How are they supported? Where the skills gaps? There's tools as well, that enables all that. So, but again, it starts kind of it starts very much from the top down.
Yeah, when I like, being a therapist, I like that it starts with the individuals. It starts with like the players and the people and their own individual psychology. Because what I imagine is if you come up with the greatest policy, the greatest change management strategy, and you change all this stuff on paper, if the people aren't bought in, they're just gonna like loophole it, right? Or they're gonna find ways to go back to the same old culture that they had before. People are very good at resisting change. So I'm curious. You talk about coaching. How do you start with the top? How do you get into that more personal level with somebody who is in a C-level position or I don't know, leading big teams?
Yeah, it's what I love about it, and what I think what makes me so effective is that it started with my own transformation, right? Not entering judgmentally, understanding these are often well-intended individuals. They might not come across that way, but I'm not going to just judge or assume. I'm going to see really what's important for them, what's going on for them, and really start building trust. It's like, and that's how why organizations are so interesting to me. Because what are organizations? They're just a collection of people. Organizations are people. It's not this nebulous thing on paper. And it starts with every little moving piece, which are the humans and the interactions around them, how and who they interact with. Uh, so at the top, I really just start by, how I got to know you, I got to know my current partner, my business partner, etc. It's like, who is this person? Like, what's going on for them? Just being curious and really listening. And that's a skill I didn't do well. If we talk about transformation, I was married before and got divorced, and one of the things I didn't do well was listen. I heard, but I didn't listen. And easy to say, but it really requires me to like put my own agendas, set that aside, my own desires, goals, and really just be there for that other person. A lot that actually reminds me of another saying. So besides, referencing books, I love quotes, as cheesy as they are, because they just kind of make things really concise and memorable. I love this quote by Emerson. Our chief want is someone who will inspire us to be what we know we could be. If you distill that a little bit, people just want to be seen and heard and known. That's the basic human needs, and every single human being have that need. It might just be ineffective how they go about getting those needs met, but I just try to be that person for them.
Yeah, someone that like gets them. And again, in the workplace, that's so rare. You think it'd be common, right? Because like knowing your people makes you a better leader,
Yeah.
but it is
Yeah.
very rare. And yeah, do people tend to turn to coaches for that need, or how does that get met?
I think generally it doesn't.
Yeah,
I think we just
fair.
so, especially, localizing a little bit, I think in our very driven, hardworking, Puritan origin based, culture. It's all about output, results, achievements, and sometimes superficial satisfaction, like who you work for, how big the company is, how much money you make, all that stuff. Where it really should be about the individual. I think my curiosity is always around how people try to get those needs met, which is usually just often kind of gossiping or venting.
Yeah.
And there's maybe a role for the venting that's helped the process, but if it's not turned around constructively, nothing changes. If you change nothing, nothing changes. And that's where you need someone with a bit of a coaching mindset. And by the way, managers can be coaches as well. The most effective managers are coaches or have that coaching skill in their repertoire, and really help people be heard, seen, and not tell them what to do or how to think or feel, but help them get those insights and help them figure out for themselves, how do I go about addressing this concern and getting this need met? Um, and yeah, again, it starts at it. You can institutionalize it through leadership development. A big part of this is hiring the managers who kind of care and think about that. That's a little bit harder to train. You can train the coaching skill. Yeah.
Yeah, they have to be interested in people to begin with, right? Or they see the value in people in order to, build the skills on top of that.
That's a big. I mean, you can always get external coaches as well. That's a thing.
Yeah.
It's corporate coaching. You can hire external coaches, or even bigger companies have it internally. A lot of companies sponsor a leader to go find that coach. But yeah, it's so powerful if you have someone. And I mean, I think companies often fall in the trap of getting people who are good individual contributors. Right? I almost feel like I shouldn't have to say this because I think everyone knows it, but it's probably worth saying is that really your people leaders is on a different track than an individual contributor, right? Their main function is to enable people. They are a talent enabler, is another way of putting it.
Yeah, yeah. So, you talk about focusing on somebody's strength and this combination of insight and action, which I think is critical, right? I mean, I think some people focus too much on action but no insight, so they're just kind of like flailing in the dark,
Yeah.
right? Or in therapy, they often run into the trap of all insight but no action, right? Where it's just a lot of navel gazing and thinking and a lot of intellectual work, but not actually making
Yeah.
change. So, I know this is a big question, something that I work with a lot in my job too, but it's like, what is that catalyst moment? Like, how do you get somebody from insight to action?
Oof. It's a process.
Yeah.
I think there's no like silver bullet. Um, there are some prerequisites. I think a lot of it comes through someone has developed emotional intelligence. I think that's something that's important for me to say is that you're not born with EQ, with emotional intelligence, self-awareness. It's something that's developed. Um, and who knows, it's a combination of stuff. You'll probably be able to explain that better, but it's condition. What's the condition to get to a point where you're open, and receptive to what's going on to get that feedback? Um, and so that's kind of your fertile ground. And then you have the questions around this kind of exploration questions, like why is that? Why do you feel that way about this situation? And just that introspection, if we can get the individual to a safe space where they slow down and do introspection, you ask a powerful question, that's often where you get that light bulb moment. And it's often you need several of them, several of those kind of light bulb moments and insights. But again, in a workspace, we work fast. We don't always slow down. So you need to create that space as best possible if you're effective people leader. Or you need to go outside of work and like park that stuff and then really create a place where someone can learn and like challenge you in a gentle way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the questions like the Socratic method, right, is really critical, right? When you start to like drill in and dig deep into what motivates people, what they really want.
Mm,
And that
mm,
safety is critical because I think what a lot of
mm,
people want, just
mm,
like you said, is like to be seen and heard and known and to be respected. And it's
mm,
often difficult to admit those types of things in the workplace, right? Because they have this
mm,
idea that it's all work.
mm.
It should just be professional. It should just be about the mission. It should just be about like getting your job done or being the best. But oftentimes the needs are relational. Like I just want this person to like me, or I
Yeah,
just want to feel like people listen to what I say. It's very
yeah.
kind of basic needs.
100%. And when I think about, the pattern of questions like how do we bring this into workplace or how do we assess it, I do think that's not something one person can change.
Hmm.
Is that culture around, do we understand that this company's success relies on the relationships within the company? And that's maybe a good way to test it in an interview process. Like how do you get work done? Versus asking what is the culture like? It's a little bit
Yeah.
broad and nebulous. You can kind of sidestep it and say fluffy stuff, and we have food and couches and stuff, right? But it's like how do you resolve conflict? Like how do you give feedback? How do you focus on people's growth?
Hmm.
And there's actually a list of questions that I can also share. It really probes that. But if there's not an understanding of, it's not about just get the work done.
Yeah.
Like that's a bit of a trigger thing for me because I'm like, well, how does the work get done? It's not just it's people and relationships. And the stronger those relationships are, that is the foundation of your company's success
Hmm.
and the individual's personal success. It's nothing else. It's not your IP. It's not
Yeah.
how many investment backing you have, all that stuff.
Yeah, it's the people, right, that make up the organization. Because if they
Yeah,
leave, you have no company. Like it
yeah.
just all falls
Mhm.
apart.
As cliche as that sounds, and if when we've studied companies that are successful or not, that's the pattern. It's the people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this is great. We're going to move into our final commercial break. When we get back, we'll talk to listeners about how they might get started on shifting culture, how they might, strategically go through a conflict with somebody, with a leader or with an employee. And I'm also just curious randomly, like what it's like in a small business, where it's off or a family business. I think we're talking a lot about
Mm, mm,
corporations and large organizations, but I know a lot of
mm.
our listeners are also small business owners. So I'd be curious how it trickles down into those types of settings. So
Media one.
yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of good stuff to talk about, and we'll see you on the other side of the commercial break. Welcome back to the show. I'm here with Philip Botha, and we're talking about culture in business, conflict resolution, and just and how to get your needs met in the workplace. So, Philip, we ended last time with a curiosity. I'm curious, like, how these things apply to small businesses, whether it be
Mm,
startups or restaurants or blue collar businesses.
mm,
I think
mm,
a lot of people in those positions think that coaching is only for the big guys in a way, right? It's only for the
mm,
corporations. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to be had for coaching on the small business level where the
mm,
boundaries are even more blurred often. Sometimes it's family
yeah,
members. Sometimes it's, you hired your friend to work at your restaurant.
yeah,
Sometimes there's, things like childcare where the kid comes into the office and, is
mm,
there while people are working, right? Like it's a much less boundaried place, and
yeah,
often more of these social dynamics can even arise in a small business setting. So I'm
yeah,
curious if you had experience working with small businesses or startups and what it's
yeah.
like. How do you apply these ideas to those?
I mean, absolutely. I think in bigger organizations, right, you can kind of hide behind process, go into a cubicle or a different office and send someone a text
Mm-hmm.
message. So I'll use my current situation a little bit as an example. So being a glutton for punishment, finishing up my master's degree and doing coaching and consulting as well. I started a business with someone I've known for a while has also become a close friend and currently from out of town staying with me. So we're sharing a
Yeah.
fairly small apartment and we're working in the same space. So we basically see each other all day unless I choose to go for a run and have my own space a little bit. And yeah, I mean, and because it's an early stage startup,
Yeah.
it's high pressure. It's very much the entrepreneurial roller coaster. And some days are great, some days are not so good. Some days one of us is down and the other's up, and vice versa. So a little ritual that we started is to start the day. So we have this planned meeting point ritual where we have a big whiteboard in my living room, and that's where we meet every morning at 8 a.m. And we started by literally a check-in, like, how are you? Like, how are you doing? And being real and saying, like, pressing each other, like, really, what's going, like, how are you reading? And sometimes, okay, it's fine. But sometimes, like, yeah, I'm not feeling great today. I'm feeling stressed. This, and literally just like sharing. I'm stressed about, are we getting enough funding? Like, what's our pitch deck look like? Am I getting enough time to, do calls, stuff like that? Another person, what we've both learned, and kind of a side note is that we both actually kind of coaches as well, but we both have our own coaches and therapists, right? So it's really a good coach and a good therapist. I know, Marcus, you would attest, have a therapist and a coach as well, or a coach, right?
Definitely. Yep.
So we've been primed and prepped and coached on how to engage and create space, hold space with the other person. Sometimes our check-ins are literally, I'd say a minute, 30 seconds, maybe 2 minutes. This week we had a check-in for an hour. That was what was needed. Unfortunately, we had time and we didn't run into meetings or engagements, but that was what was needed. And we unpacked things. We spoke about some relationship stuff. I think that's the other big thing is also knowing when you're talking about work and when you're talking about the work relationship and kind of separating those two things. You can kind of, there's frameworks like crucial conversations helps with that as well. But really making the time to know, hey, are we okay? Is everything that's said needs to be said? And we're running on that fuel still for the rest of the week because we know we got each other, we know what's going on for the other person, we can adjust accordingly, consider and support. And that's huge. That is what we preach and that's what we try to practice. It's not easy and it's like, oh, I got to do work. I'm feeling pressure. I should be doing this call, whatever. But I'm like, this is really important. Like I'm investing here in a relationship and the future of the company.
Absolutely. Right. And like the relationship is what's
Mhm.
going to endure beyond just the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like, these are great skills, right? Like talking about your
Mhm.
relationship, checking in, being curious about people. Do you find, and maybe it's not a binary question, but like, is it easier to build it in the workplace or in your life? Or is there a pathway where people build it in the workplace
Mm.
and then end up doing it more in their life? Because I can see these
Mm.
coaching skills being useful all the time.
Absolutely. There's definitely opportunity both ways. Another example I'll give you, another framework that was a game changer in my personal life is called nonviolent communication. It's very similar to Crucial Conversations, just a little bit older and a little bit different branding. Um, but it focuses on OFNR as the framework, observations, feelings, needs, requests. I learned that I was fortunate to go through like a 3-4 session training program. It's pretty intense and a lot of homework and reading a book and etc. And I was able to practice it in the workplace. But I ended up applying it with my relationships with my mom and my brother. And it completely changed those relationships from me being nice guy and not dealing with the issues, but and feeling just decades of baggage, right? And actually being able to deconstruct the baggage. Like what's in this baggage, right? I love the funny saying, we all have baggage. The only question is whether it's checked or carry on.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like we had a lot of carry on baggage in our relationship. And through just observing, sharing what's going on, what I noticed for the person and being curious, they're able to share and unpack that baggage. And I actually understood a lot of things. Just them feeling recognized in how they feel without judgment. Like whether I agree they should feel that way or not, doesn't matter. Just acknowledging, I can see why that frustrates you when we interact this way. And then helping them, kind of articulate what they need from me and understand, helping them articulate the request. Like, what would you like? How can I support you? What does that look like? Absolute game changer. I use that, many years now, coaching or supporting internal in the company. And it's a very similar mindset I use when I coach, externally as well.
Yeah, so I like that you've really like made coaching a lifestyle. I know we talked about that a little bit earlier in the episode, but how can someone start to follow that path, right, and bring coaching into their day to day?
Yeah, I think the key thing is maybe not to get stuck on the word coaching. Well, what does a coach do? And I think to differentiate, and this was part of my journey as well. Uh, um, it's another good book called the Coaching Habit. It talks about, and it's actually a great TED talk. It's fairly short by Michael Bungay, and he talks about the advice monster. And I'm like, I read that book and listened to TED talk, and I'm like, shoot, that's me. I have a massive advice monster. Guy, it's well intended. I want to help people. I have a lot of thoughts and advice, but it actually helps kind of push people away, and they don't actually feel seen and heard. So therefore, they don't hear the potentially helpful advice you have. You know, the other point the book makes is that our advice isn't always as good as we think because we haven't actually heard the other person. We haven't listened,
Yeah.
well enough. So coaching really is just first of all just being curious, asking questions, and helping the person feel seen and heard. And to your point earlier of not staying there and falling trapped in navel gazing, then be like, so what are you going to do? Because psychologically what happens is that they've now processed the emotions. They are likely more receptive. They have potentially awareness through what you've helped them do. And you're still asking questions. You're asking questions. I think 9, 10 questions, as hard as that is, before you give advice. That's a little things people can try is just count the number of questions before you give advice. And I think that they did research and it was like, average was like 2 or 3. If at all. Sometimes people just get like, oh, you should do this, you should do that. When the person might not feel like, well, you don't actually get it. That's not somewhat maybe helpful, but not really. And even when it comes to actioning, ask the person, what do you think is best? Because they probably often know. It's their feelings, it's the emotion that's the block.
Right.
That's the need, not the problem solving necessarily. And when you've asked a few questions, then at the end you can say, hey, I have a thought. What about this? What do you think? And turn it back on. And that's a skill. It takes practice. It's hard to fall into old habits, and I've had to work really hard to really undo that. And I think making it. I think probably the other question will come up is like, well, you don't want your spouse to feel like you're coaching them, right? And it might be a little bit awkward initially, but once they understand, like this is what you're trying to do, you're just trying to be curious and understand. And might be a little bit bull in the china shop, but this is the intent. In saying that, they will probably get it and kind of give you space and just go with it.
Totally. Yeah, and I think just asking, heteronormative relationships, asking like, hey, are we solving problems or are we just trying to understand? Or like, are you ready for some advice? I think consent is like really important when it comes to that, and not jumping to conclusions.
Yeah, love that. Such a good point. And that's another question. Like, hey, how can I support you right now? What do you need from me right now? That simple question is so powerful. Even that, just they'll probably feel heard.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I want to bring you back to what you said because, obviously that's like a therapy component is it's the emotions. It's not that they haven't thought about it. And especially if you haven't asked questions, the advice you're going to give, they've probably thought about whatever that crossroad moment is. But
Yeah.
it's often that, yeah, they're afraid, or they're not secure, or they're not feeling confident, or they're worried that it might play out in a way they're anxious, right? That didn't work out before based on
Mm,
some other past relationship that they had. It's often a
mm,
lot deeper than it's like, hey, have you
mm.
tried option A? Because
Yeah.
they probably thought about that one. You know.
Exactly. I had a friend who used to say like, "Oh, so you're saying when you give me this advice, you're saying there's this thing called the internet. Oh, I never thought about Googling. I can
Right.
Google it." So, I mean, it's obviously not my intent. I'm trying to be helpful, but yeah, it doesn't, it comes across as unempathetic.
Right. Right.
Mm,
So as we're nearing the end of our show here, I'm curious, Philip, like if someone could take
mm,
an action right away, if they feel inspired or curious about
mm,
this conversation, is there
mm,
something that they could do, either a resource that they could read, or maybe a writing prompt, or introspection, or questions they could ask somebody? I don't know. Like how would you recommend somebody get
mm,
started when it comes to building a healthier culture for themselves, both in the workplace and at home, and internally?
mm. Yeah, I mean, it all starts with awareness, right?
Hmm.
I think in that awareness, a sounding board is quite powerful. So, not surprisingly, I'm going to promote coaching, right? Because I'm in the business of helping people
Hmm.
and getting their needs met because that's my place in the world. And I found coaching to be super powerful, but it doesn't have to be a professional coach. It can be someone who's just a really good listener and actually, can create that space for you. And then out of that, you'll kind of hopefully get clarity of your blind spots and what you need help with. As a coach, I'm super aware, like my focus very much in the present and looking forward. Sometimes I notice some people have issues and things they need to unpack and work on that's maybe deeper. And for that, I'll advise them to a therapist. Like, need someone to like understand where you are currently, where you came from that journey, right? And there's a lot more psychotherapy, and that's your expertise, right, Mark? And then from there, there's a lot of things, and I can give specific things that I worked on from my perspective. Just educate yourself. I think a big part of just what worked for me was not just talking about it, but really educating myself, like understanding. And I mean, a lot of people feel they want to change something, but they're not really necessarily investing in it. I think that's the question I'll probably leave people with, like, what do I want to change and how am I going to go about it?
Yeah.
Right. And I can tell you some books on my journey, like, um, I want to plug that one because that was a game changer for me was the Man's Guide to Women.
Hmm.
That was huge, right? I mean, therapy
It's a good book.
revealed a lot of things.
Yeah.
I think I've read that one three times now,
Nice.
or listened to it three times. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I have a healthy relationship, happy relationship to thank for that journey. But it took me like 4 years and a lot of introspection, a lot of work, and a lot of support from individuals like yourself, as well as men's groups. Like that peer support, peer coaching, peer accountability is huge.
Yeah, and
Mm,
you mentioned a ton of books. We'll put those in the show note for the listeners. I think
mm,
education is huge because one, it
mm,
gives you a deeper understanding and deeper awareness, and it
mm,
might help connect some
mm,
dots that you weren't sure were
mm,
connected. It's like, oh yeah, this is all the same
mm,
thing. And for me,
mm.
it's helped me feel less alone. Because if there's like a book about it, right? Like
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
crazy, right? Clearly, a lot of people feel and think the way that I do, or
Mm.
have the same problems that I do. So
Yeah.
it's very validating and like, oh, okay, I'm not
Mm,
just like
mm.
batshit. I'm not like a outlier, right?
Yeah.
Like my issues are actually pretty common.
Yeah. It breaks down that shame. You
Yeah,
don't feel alone, like you said. That's huge because that's where shame thrives in isolation. Right.
yeah. Well, Philip,
Mm,
this is a great conversation. I'm excited to have you back on the show in a bit.
mm.
But I'm curious if people want to learn more about you and about what you do, where could they find you online?
LinkedIn is a good place. Philip Botha, put that link in there. It's a link to quick meetings. I have a website, cultureadvantage.co.za. That's also on my LinkedIn page. So that's a good place to reach me. Super responsive, and all my contact details are there.
Fantastic. And all stuff's in the show note if you want to contact Philip and learn more about him. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you next week, another episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast.
Thanks, Mark.